Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds and under 30 spells cast in a single game. Today I'm your host, Phil. Joining me, my wizardly co-host, Davy. How are you doing, Davy?
I'm good. I was worried you're going to say you're weird co-host. So
No, we got to try and rein in the puns. On Wednesday, I was recording with a story phase, and I think I got enough puns to last me at least a month. So
those guys are just shameless. It's terrible.
It was Paul and Eric on the same episode.
Oh, no.
So.
All right. Well, you're in a safe space now. So
yeah. But if folks couldn't guess from that, today we are going to be talking Wyrdhollow. The new box is imminent. It will be on pre-order the day that this drops, as usual. And we're pretty excited to talk about it. There's a whole lot in there. It'll be pretty fun. As usual, we get these ahead of time so that we can play with them, look at the cards, figure out sort of what to say. And we get them from GW. We really appreciate having that opportunity. So thanks to GW for continuing that practice. It's really, really helped with all of our recordings in the last, I don't know how long it's been now, but year and a half or whatever.
Yeah. And Phil and I have never once shivved each other to see who gets the copy that arrives.
No, never. They always show up at your house anyway, so
it's true.
It's always your generosity as to whether any of them end up in my hands anyway.
I'm a benevolent tyrant. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super hyped. I'm excited. We have a ton to talk about, but I'm excited to talk about it. Yeah.
So let's keep it moving since there is a lot to talk about, and we've got our community shout outs quick.
Yeah.
You got anything?
Yeah. Sleek's Bowl has a new article out, amazingly named Truth and Claw. So it's doing the Truth Seekers, Xandire's Truth Seekers as a Tooth and Claw combo for an aggro build. On the name alone, very, very awesome. And then it does that thing I like, which is take a look at a warband that not a lot of people are using. So
yeah.
And I am thinking about dipping in them. I having done well with the Cunning crew, I always feel like there's more I can learn with them. So I keep on almost picking them back up, but I really should spread it around. And I was like, maybe I'd do their box mates. So this is kind of good timing for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Not necessarily a specific community article or content creator, but for all the people who gave us feedback again on our last debate episode, really appreciated. We always seem to get a lot of feedback, and it's really great to hear it. Lots of conversation in our Discord after that episode dropped, which is always really cool to see. So thanks, everybody. If you have any other debate topics that you think we should cover, let us know. We like that format. We think we'll keep doing it, but we need topics.
Sure. Yeah. You should also come play games with us. We have, by the time you're hearing this, it's 3 weeks from us, but 2 weeks from the day you are hearing this, if you listen to this on the release day. May 13th is our event. It will be at Noble Knight Games in Madison. It should kick off at 10. You can find more information about it in the link on our webpage, and it will be Nemesis format, and we'll do all the usual things. We'll have prize support. We'll bring some extra factions if you are just looking to dip your toe in, or bring somebody if you can convince them to come out. We make it nice and beginner friendly, and if our calculations are correct, and I believe they are, it will be 1 week after the official release of Wyrdhollow. So it'll be a great coming out party for Wyrdhollow. Get to try out all the new stuff that we're about to talk about here.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that same vein, we've had weird shipping problems. So obviously we'll adjust if anything happens again. And hopefully Beastbound Assault will be out before then. But if not, we'll make sure that, that continues to be a non-option just for the sake of fairness, because it's not accessible to most people in North America.
Right.
I think that's it for community shoutouts. Davy, what the heck has been going on with you?
Well, prepping for this episode, Phil,
Yeah.
it's awkwardly. So we simultaneously have going on is prep for this huge release, but also trying to wrap up our Sleeks Bowl. It is tough to find time to play games with the local community, also prep for this podcast and also do that. So that is still coming. It's in the background, but the content monster is ever demanding. So we're being slowed by that in order to have some slightly better informed takes than if we had just totally ignored all this stuff. But look out, because Magic the Edra is coming for you, Phil. So.
Oh yeah, I'm prepared. I've settled on Ilthari's Guardians.
Hell yeah.
About a 50-50 split of spells and non-spells. So could be bad if Ilthari goes down quickly, but we'll see.
Yeah. Are we all Nightvault? I know we have.
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
Because
we've got Godsworn, we've got Eyes, we've got Mollog, we've got Ilthari's. Who am I missing? Skylar?
Yeah.
I don't remember what Skylar's got. We'll have to check in with him. We'll have to peer pressure him into
That's true. If he's not Nightvault, and he'll be now.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Yeah. But that's it. Prepping for this and doing a little Sleeks Bowl on the side.
Yeah, absolutely. I have basically been doing the same thing. We've got a whole bunch of cards. These boxes with 4 decks. There's a lot of cards to review, and getting games in with these. And I mean, we sometimes just do like a one-off game with these boxes, but we got a few extras this time around, and I'm kind of glad we did.
Yeah.
To actually be able to try the new decks and the faction decks, just straight rivals. It's pretty informative.
It'll be worth. I think we'll get into that in a bit here, but worth kind of comparing our initial impressions, thoughts, see if we can maintain those versus after having played a few. I thought that was pretty informative.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else hobby wise, or should we dive right in?
I think we got enough to talk about. I'm good to dive right in.
Sweet. All right. So a good place to start with any new box we've found, because we've been tripped up by this, is that you should read the rule book, probably cover to cover, because they like to sneak things in unexpected places. Yep. So we did another peruse of the rule book this time around.
Yeah. I want to give a tip of the hat. There's a technique that Skylar used on the Gnarlwood box, where he actually laid out rulebook side by side to try and catch everything. And so we made sure that technique was employed for this this episode. So I believe that we are not going to be tripping on ourselves this time. I think we've got it's also helped by there's not quite so many changes here. So
yeah, that's true. True.
But that's something that's really up Skylar's alley, and so I'm glad he was able to kind of develop that technique here, and the podcast is able to use that.
Yeah, I think it works pretty well. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, it sounds simple, but I wouldn't have thought to do it. Like we said, you have the 2 rule books and you like compare each section, and then you just highlight all the differences. Yeah. So even if it's just a wording change, at least it's marked. So you like, no, something's different here. Does it make a change?
Well, because your brain is so good at filling in things that it expects to see. So what really got me in the Gnarlwood box was that there would be, a line that would just get dropped or something, So there wouldn't be like, this fighter can, like under move action, this fighter can't make a move action if it has a move token. Like that's just not there anymore. And you're like, oh, but my brain just fills it in because I've played it that way so long. So yeah. So what are those changes?
Well, so the first change is there's a tiebreaker change.
Yeah.
The exact specifics are actually escaping me right now. I know.
So it's the first tiebreaker is still. Do you have anybody on the board
Yes.
If one side is wiped out,
now I remember.
just like just like the old way, if one side is wiped out, then whoever still has fighters left wins.
Yep.
Now, it used to be that the next tiebreaker was just who's on the most objectives, right?
Yep.
Now it is who is on the highest values worth of objectives.
Yeah. So count them up and see who's got the most. So if you've got objective 5,
you got a big head start.
You're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah. Conversely, if you are on, I don't know, like 5 and 1, and I'm on 4 and 3, then I've got that tiebreaker. So.
Yeah. It's a fun change, I think. I haven't seen it actually come up, obviously, because ties aren't that common, but it makes you care about the numbers. I think there's so many things in the game that just completely ignore the numbers that it's nice that they're adding something in that will always care, because it feels like something that they always wanted to have as a main part of the game, that like these have numbers and the numbers matter. And then everyone went out of their way to not care about the numbers because it made everything so much harder. So
I think I like it. I think the tiebreaker for being on objectives was relatively rare that it comes up anyway, but often enough, and you and I can both think of games where it was super important. I know I won the second game of my final match for the pre-Acon tournament on an objective tiebreaker, where I was standing on one and the other player wasn't. And so already there was some reward for like, hey, keeping an eye on things like what's my, identifying like, hey, this game is going to be close. How can I set it up where I get as much of my objectives as possible, or, score as much of my glory as possible, but also end up on a lot of these objectives.
Right.
Doing that also in mind, where like, well, if I have to pick one or commit my resources to one or the other, or all that sort of thing, or it might just be identifying like, hey, I'm not going to, like, I can get on the same number of objectives, but I know that my opponent has 5 and 4 sitting over there. So I'm not going to win it on that, which means that I need to go I need to take the gamble, because sometimes that's how it ends up, is like, I think I can play the safer thing and stay on these, and I'll, so I like that extra layer, and it's not a difficult one to understand, but I think it rewards a little bit of more, a little bit more strategic play in that sense. I suppose it could be argued that, there's some luck component as to where, objective 5 ends up. Whoever's got it in their territory might have an advantage, but there's so much blending and blurring of lines that is not that big a deal, I don't think.
Yeah. And I mean, there was always the advantage of just ending up with 3 objectives, and sometimes it was like, well, I just didn't get 3 this time. So to say that it's in any way more luck dependent now than it used to be, I don't think is really a good argument.
Right. And with the last couple seasons worth of objective placements where you no longer are placing on the edge unless there's it used to be that 5th objective could go on the edge. And so if you had 3 objectives, you could really bury one. You're not ever, not ever is not accurate, but it's incredibly rare that you're going to be able to super bury one in the back line.
Yep. Absolutely. So that's the new tiebreaker changes. After that, it's same. I think that's pretty much it. That's just like at that point, you just have a true tie, which surprisingly comes up more often than you'd think. So the next 2 kind of go together. These are 2 new action types that you can take. We've got stun and barge. Folks might have seen these already. They were in a Warcom article just talking about what these are and how they work. They literally just put a picture of the rulebook in those articles. So you may have even read the full rule already. But so a stun action is like an attack action, except that instead of choosing to roll dice to do damage, you just stun an adjacent opponent.
Stun being...
Stagger.
Yep.
Stagger.
Yeah.
So I like the option. I wonder a little bit about the efficiency of it. Like, is that going to be something that's worth doing? I would kind of hope that maybe down the line we'll see some cards that are like, as a reaction after a move, you can do a stun or something like that. But either way, and then, like I said, to go along with it, we also have Barge, which is just like the charge equivalent of a stun. So you get to make a move and then do a stun, and then you also get a stagger token.
Right.
So
it's like a move and a collective stagger of both the fighters involved.
yeah,
It does not give you a charge token,
it does not.
which a couple seasons ago I'd say that's a definite bonus because it'd give you a little more options on that other end. Now maybe a little less so because you might be interested in getting a charge token on all your fighters so that you can continue to activate. So this doesn't let you shortcut the sort of charged out situation.
Yeah. I suppose the one scenario I can think of where I'd probably want to do this is if I, want to do just a move, but now I have this option to at least get something else out of my move. I might choose to do that. Of course, giving your opponent a reroll is kind of scary. But there have been times where I've felt like it's fine if the defense of my fighter is high enough that it's like, it's probably going to work out anyway.
Yeah, I think the having a stagger on yourself is it can be a fairly high cost because I was thinking exactly the same thing that you were. I've had matchups with like Grimwatch or whatever where I have like just an attack that's nothing. It's a 2 Fury 1 damage attack or something. My real point of this activation is get one of these ghouls onto an objective and be sitting there. And now I'm on it. Now they got to do something. They got to knock me off or something like that.
Yeah.
And you would often make it as part of a charge. Like, okay, I'll charge. And there were circumstances where like, that's actually, I kind of don't want to even charge because maybe I'm fighting like Gore Chosen that would say, sweet, you got lucky, you got 1 damage on me. Anyway, I've got a tithe counter now. Like, ugh,
yeah.
crap.
not great.
Yep. So, but thinking of the circumstances where I'd be willing to stagger myself, that can feel tough. Sometimes it just doesn't matter because they're already on like 5 or 6 dice from upgrades. You're like, well, what's one more reroll? Who cares? Maybe it's more important there. Both these things are not, they don't feel like particularly high efficiency options for your activation, right? Like,
no.
Even the stun thing, if you start the round and they've got one fighter who, went on guard or something like that, you can stun them. That feels pretty good because you flip their guard. All of a sudden they like it. That's a more dramatic move, right? From on guard to staggered. To flip that over, that is a pretty significant change in their level of defense. Barge, if you have a guard card that you're planning on using anyway, if you're not attacking, that's not a bad call. Run in, stagger the opponent and yourself, and then guard yourself so that you clear your stagger and go back on guard. But the thing is, if you have used an activation to stagger somebody, they can use an activation to put themselves back on guard unless they're charged out. Unless that fighter is charged and someone else hasn't. So I think the number of times where this comes up is going to be relatively low unless you have objectives that are scoring off it or what have you.
There'll be some destruction warbands that are just kind of like, I can lean into that and do the stun thing and
sure,
maybe do the stagger claw pack build.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking of.
That's sort of a weird one.
I was trying to think. I think we have our preview set saw about 6 practice games run through. I don't think I ever saw either of these happen, but that's sometimes a hard thing to put your finger on because there's so many new things. Like there may have been the opportunity where it actually be useful and you just didn't remember that it was a thing. So
yeah, I think there was a lot of times where I just didn't even think about it.
yeah.
To be honest, I think in our games, I just more often than not, I viewed an attack as the better choice and just didn't even think about stunning. But, there's actually a card. We can talk about it when we get there, but there's actually a card in Pandaemonium that
I was
cares
thinking
about
exactly the same
being
one.
staggered.
Yeah.
And there was actually a play I can remember where I was like, okay, well, I need to stagger one of my other fighters. So, I'll charge through this snare hex and then I'll get this surge and maybe an attack off, which is probably still the better move. But like I could have done a less risky play where I did like a barge or something.
Yeah.
And
a barge,
so,
or if the snare hex wasn't there,
yeah, if I didn't have one.
Yeah.
So for sure. I guess the only other thing I can think of that, again, it didn't come up in these Rivals games because why would it? But if anybody is playing around Delve, stagger tokens can be very annoying.
Yep.
So I can think of like if you really want cover hexes for some reason, or if you're trying to do the hold all objectives in one territory and you're trying to flip some of them, it can be very disruptive to get the stagger tokens. So there's probably something there where you'll be able to see that like, oh, my opponent's going to want to flip that. I'm going to go.
I mean, yeah, I can say with my cunning crew, I was definitely doing a lot of kind of flipping and, trying to manipulate the board at the end, where I try to do something like, well, I want to have cover for the next round. So I'm going to flip these into cover at the end, but with the intention of then flipping them back before the next end phase came around, because maybe I was carrying stockpile or something like that cared about holding a particular quantity of objectives or something like that. And so that would really kind of blow me up as far as that goes.
Yeah. And I suppose since we kind of just mentioned it, there's one of the new things that goes in here is just a new term for hazard hexes. This kind of covers all of the different types of non-generic hexes. So you've got snares and lethals and cover, and they're all covered as hazard hexes now. And as we were talking about, there's now some snare hexes printed on the new boards, and these are included in the hazard hexes. So not a big change, but just something to be aware of. There'll, I think, now be a couple of cards that will reference to just say, if your fighters are in hazard hexes. That's just cut some words, just shortens things up a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
That's almost everything. The one new other rule is pretty big one. Some people are already talking about it. You want to cover this one?
Sure. This one I was pretty excited to see. It's salvage. So this is a rule. The short of it is gives you another option in the power step, in the same way that you could use your turn in the power step to delve. Here you can use your turn in the power step to discard a power card and draw a replacement if that power card is restricted to a fighter that is no longer on the board. Specifically, and if it's, usable by multiple, say it's restricted to beasts, and one of your two beasts is dead, this you can't trigger salvage. There has to be no viable options for that power card.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And that also includes the gambit spells.
Right. Right. And so there's a few things I like about this. I like that, like you mentioned with the gambit spells, this gives you a little more reason to say like, hey, there's a really good gambit spell. I only have one caster. Traditionally, when you're building a deck, a card would have to be very, very, very good to overcome the threshold of, hey, if I lose a fighter, then this is just taking up dead space in my deck.
Yeah.
And if you look especially at some of the older warbands, I think our example that we give often is Reavers. I think another good example is Grashrax Despoilers. where a very large number of their upgrades are given over to fighter specific upgrades. Now, whether you would still take those anyways, maybe not, but there were so many of those. You're like, I can't include it. Like, this is kind of a cool card, but I can't include it because like I am too likely to lose one of these fighters, and I just don't want it to take up space. And that's a shame because I think it's cool to have these flavorful cards that are specific to a given fighter. And those cards often did not see play again, like I said, unless they are particularly powerful. So I'm excited to see what cards we get to have in play that wouldn't have otherwise made the cut for deck building particularly in championships where you see it at its worst. You see more of them once you start playing Nemesis, and then obviously you see all of them if you're doing rivals, but that can maybe give a little bit of a boost to a rivals deck that is really heavy on that kind of card.
Absolutely.
So it may be more impactful it's impactful in the different formats in different ways. Championship, it opens up deck building options. Rivals, it takes away some of the feel bad from ending up with a hand full of cards that are for guys who are dead.
Yeah. And I also feel like, some of the stuff we saw discussed, it was like, oh, this, allows for, lazier deck building and, the stuff that was already being taken that was restricted because it was so good. Now those cards are just amazing. And it's kind of like, okay, those things are true, but isn't it better that we like allow for those other cards that never made it into decks to be at least playable now, even if it gives a slight bump to these other things? So I feel like it's overall a positive. I'm excited to see how it works.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I think we can think of a couple particular warbands that really get a lot out of this. I think Hexbane's Hunters were already including a number of cards that were restricted. I mean, I think I see Bane of Evil out there a fair amount. Woodcutter Strength, maybe. Pox got one, Deep Scars, that maybe wasn't as popular, but is really good. And so it'll be interesting to see if do they need an extra restriction out of it if they get a bump on that. There's also, and I'm kind of snagging some of Flavius's talking points. He was someone I saw that was particularly against it, and I helped me kind of understand that side of the discussion as well. If you're including some of these riskier cards and then those fighters die, well, then you effectively have you're thinning your upgrades in favor of gambits. That's more important earlier on. Later in the game, you have enough glory where the upgrades aren't gated nearly as much. And so I don't know if it'll be quite as impactful as all that, because you still would have to lose a fighter and you have to lose them early for it to likely matter. But it's worth keeping an eye on. I'm interested to see what the impact is, but mostly I'm excited to see cards that you might not otherwise gotten to play nearly as much.
Yeah. There is certainly some math to having some free card draw baked into your deck, where if I can't play this, I just get to, rummage it away and get a new card, which can, once you start to get down to the bottom half of your deck, that can actually be quite impactful, because you generally know that what's remaining and how badly you maybe need those cards. And you might even be more willing to risk certain fighters if you know that the payoff for them dying is you get to draw into some really good cards. But sure. I don't really see that as something that's gonna break the game. But like you said, we'll watch it.
Right. If I know that you have Bane of Evil in your deck, I'm still gonna try and down Hexbane. Because even if you get to cycle that, I'd rather you don't use it, period. So I guess what remains to be seen with a lot more games out is it more in the sort of the mind of Flavius, where it's, hey, this gives too much benefit, or is that more of an old way of thinking and this is maybe not as big an impact, and it just kind of opens things up. So
yeah, All right. Well, believe that is all of the rulebook changes. Obviously, if we missed anything this time around, man, shame on us. We certainly tried very
Yeah.
hard to not miss anything, but if we did, let us know. We do want to know about it if we miss it, but also that would feel bad this time around. Not that it didn't feel bad last time. Right. So we've got 2 new warbands and 2 new rivals decks in this box to get through. Where would you like to start?
Let's start with I think our group is most excited about Ephilim's Pandaemonium. So why don't we just start there?
Sure. So we're not going to do a card by card deep dive for these guys. We have that up on the blog, so keep an eye out for the
will.
It's not there yet, but yes, there will be an article up. We've got review up for all the cards. At least I've done review on all the cards at this point. I was very excited to review all of these and burned through all of them. It took about a week still, but yeah. So high level. Ephilim's Pandaemonium. So this is a Tzeentch summoner with a bunch of different little demon guys, which are keyworded with changer. So they're all changers, and there's a lot of things in the deck that care about changers and where they are and what they're doing. So that is sort of in a nutshell what the warband is looking to do. Being Tzeentch, it is very spell focused. And I think other things to note about the fighters themselves, they kind of all have a different role to play. So all the little changers do a little bit of a different thing, but most of them have a ranged spell attack without being wizards.
Yeah. That's the first time we've seen that.
Yeah. So a little strange. So it will look just like a normal attack, but the symbol will just be the magic symbol. So you just roll the number of dice that it shows, and it still counts as a spell. It's just they're not a wizard. So I guess the only things to kind of watch out for that I noticed having to keep track of is like some cards say like after you've cast X number of spells, you can score this or whatever. Other cards say after a wizard has done a thing, casting spells, you can score this. You have to keep those counts separate because the changers are not wizards. So if you cast anything with them, that doesn't work. They also cannot cast gambit spells because they're not wizards. So
right.
I definitely almost tripped over that a couple of times in our games where I was thinking like, oh, I'm in range to use this spell, so I'll do that. And then I'm like, oh, nope, Ephilim is not in range. Won't work. Fun warband, lots of different stuff going on. Anything that you want to call out about the warband at a high level before we get into the cards?
I just really like the toolbox idea of them, where you've got Spawn Maw is fast and can do damage to large targets a little bit better. Kindle Finger is surprisingly tough. I think they're more durable than you think, because Kindle Finger has 2 defense dice and actually takes -1 damage. So if you want a one-shot Kindle Finger, you have to land a 3 damage hit right out of the gate. Which is kind of a big ask. Flame Spooler has a splash damage thing, which is pretty cool. Just a lot of neat little tools. And then Apotrax, the Starefish, has an ability that at the end of a round can pull somebody off of from I guess they'd have to be 2-way because they have to end the push next to Starefish, which is incredibly disruptive. Potentially, just to always have that last minute distraction in there with some very specific caveats on it. But I think there's a awesome puzzle there, and they're all important because the closer if you have enough of them close to the leader, then the leader has an extra casting level, which early on gets her to 2 and later on gets her to potentially 3. So just I think that puzzle of figuring out where you want each person and who you want to be in each position, and then from the other side, like who you target, like that is a whole lot of stuff to wrap your head around, and it's pretty cool.
I guess just because it's something it didn't click in my head until I was actually playing with it. Starefish's push says you can push an enemy fighter up to 2 hexes and then they must end adjacent, which means they can actually be up to 3 hexes away, because once you push them 2, they can still end up adjacent after that. So it's a very big range.
Yeah.
And so like trying to position away from Apotrax was very difficult. And I was like, oh, I guess there's no objectives I can stand on where I won't just get pulled off by the fish. Like, this sucks.
Yeah. Apotrax is just randomly flying also, which...
yeah, because he's just one of those floaty Zinch demons. Just wild. But I agree. The toolbox thing, super cool. Lots of different ways to mess around with the different mechanics from the warband to get a lot of mileage.
Yeah. I think our first impression is also that they, you look at this warband comes with a plot card where you have this sequence that you do at the start of the round.
Yeah.
Where you inspire one and then stagger another and guard another and then push one. It's like, whoa, there's kind of a lot going on there, and figuring out how all this fits together. Like, man, these guys feel complicated. And for my mind, I was like, because Ephilim needs her inspire condition is 2 or more surviving friendly fighters are inspired. It's like, you could actually block her inspire if you kill the right guys. That turned out to be a lot harder to do than we realized. But so looking at it on paper, I was like, oh, it's impossible. It's possible to make it so that she just never inspires, or like inspires not until the 3rd round. That feels pretty harsh. That is still possible, but it's not nearly as easy as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, same. At least in Rivals, it was quite difficult. And I suppose just as another like thing that just reading the card, it wasn't easy for me to grasp, but playing with it made more sense. So the plot triggers specifically after the roll off for the round. So you know who's going to go first before you have to make any of the decisions. And then it's just a flow chart. Like if you have any number of changers left, go through the list until you run out of changers. If you run out of changers before you get to the bottom of the list, you just stop. Like, it's worded in such a way that the rules are very clear, but it makes it kind of confusing to read the card.
Yeah. But there's a lot of knowing how to use that change sequence well is gonna make a difference too. So I think deployment's a big deal with this warband. But you can be what was your take on their kind of overall? I don't think I knew what their playstyle was until I seen it on the board. And then did you have a sense for what their preferred playstyle is?
Yeah, going into it, I thought that they were going to be all about, like, I have to cast a bunch of spells and hold a bunch of objectives, but actually playing it, it's more about just like positioning, and then you kind of hit a lot of the spell casting incidentally, because like I said, most of these fighters have a spell attack action. So just by the nature of wanting to shoot people, you're kind of just going to cast spells anyway.
Yeah.
So it ended up kind of actually feeling more like a Thundrix in a way, where you're going to castle up on your side of the board and then shoot people as they come in.
Yeah. Oh, that feels actually a really good comparison. If you can, like, if they can build a deck that makes the other side the beatdown, to use terminology thrown out there, then you do end up with this situation. And there's a lot of things that help them with that. There's the disruption push. There's them all having, there's their boss having a right out of the gate, a range 4 damage 2 spell.
Yeah. Pretty good.
Yeah. So that lets you, just right there, lets you kind of position who is admittedly a very important piece of your warband into a relatively safe spot. So
yeah, it was surprisingly simple to keep Ephilim safe, at least in the box matchup, where you don't have like a speed 5 fighter who's trying to just dive in and kill Ephilim, and so you could just like position far enough back that like they really can't even charge Ephilim, and then as soon as they start trying to come in to attack your other fighters, Ephilim gets to start going full turret, because range 4 is surprisingly far away.
Yeah. Yeah, to the extent that you would keep miscalculating, I say you in general, like
Yeah.
when we'd be playing, both players would be like, oh, actually this spell's in range. Like, oh my God, range
Oh
4 is so far
no.
on this board. All right. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So I actually am really interested to see what people do with this warband. I think they're very flexible. I think they can do a lot of different things. I think this warband should be very good. And I think that it has a very high skill ceiling, which is nice. You like to see warbands where like they're not impossible to play out the gate. Like pretty much anybody I think could play this. They're a little more complicated than a starter warband. I think I would want to just give a new person, but once you grasp the basic rules of the game, it shouldn't be too hard to play these guys.
Right. Yeah. That's an overview. You want to talk cards?
Yeah, let's talk some cards. We got objectives, gambits, and upgrades, and we just are gonna pick out a couple favorites from each category. So, Davey, how about you lead us off with a favorite objective?
Well, I had one on here that I think you are going to end up picking based on your comment from earlier. So I actually go there's several that I like quite a bit, but one I really liked just because of the way they used the design was closing the circle. So this is a 2 glory surge, which is important right there off the bat. It has art that like highlights just how weird fighters are in this warband, which I can't get enough of. I know they're not for everybody. Man, I love it so much. It's like it's what I always thought Tzeentch demons ought to look like. So just kind of over the moon on that. But this one is score this immediately after an opponent's power step if your warband holds 3 or more objectives. We've seen almost this multiple times. I think the Despoilers and more famously Grimwatch, a little less famously Purifiers. So there's a lot of different warbands that have the 2 glory for holding 3. What I love about this is it's after an opponent's power step. So your opponent has the chance to react to this. If you get into position using a movement action on your turn, well, then they have their entire activation step. They have your power step, their activation step, and their power step to try and stop this. If you're sneaky with this and have champs build cards in there or something like that, then you can limit that by quite a lot by getting your last person on there using a power card like a sidestep or something like that to sneak on to a third objective, and then they better have a card right then. But they should be able to see it coming if you're starting to stand on those things. But it really makes it scary when you see Pandaemonium starting to gather themselves onto objectives, which is part of that we were talking about, setting up that castle. Like, hey, look at me, I'm getting on these objectives. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to come in at me? Come on in.
Feel free.
Yeah.
I do like the design. Like you say, it makes it counterable, but also it rewards that high level play where like if you know or you're very certain almost that your opponent's probably not going to have the power card right then, you can just surprise them and be like, shuffle this person with a push, teleport somebody, or swap feature tokens or something. I think we'll talk about this card in a little bit, but they have a swap feature token card, and I think you can catch people out with that.
Sure,
probably quite a bit.
Yeah, and this is another reason that having those shooting attacks is a big deal, because you can charge your changers onto objectives to set this up and some of their other hold objective style things where like with Grimwatch, who are obviously they're plenty powerful, but I've played a lot of them, and a lot of times you're making activations like, I'm gonna jog whatever Knight's Herald over onto this thing, and nothing's in range, so that's my activation, is just walking over here, and here you at least get a little bit more. You get the move and cast a spell, maybe do some damage. Yeah,
but I like seeing some hold elements in this. It's not just casting spells.
Totally.
So it feels nicely balanced to me.
Yeah. What was yours?
So there's There's a number in here that I like, but I think the design space that I found the most interesting was Callous Manipulator, which I think was the one that you
Yeah.
kindly saved for me.
Yeah.
So this is a surge, and you score this after an activation step or power step, which
Yeah.
is pretty interesting. So it's very flexible. You can score this either after a friendly changer was taken out of action in that step. So if somebody pings your changer off, or they charge and kill a changer, you get to score this. So it's one of those where you kind of get rewarded for your opponent doing things.
Yeah.
Or if you have 2 or more friendly changers that are staggered.
Yeah.
And so we now know, we've got those couple new ways you can stagger. You could delve to stagger. There's snare hexes you could run through.
Yeah.
And in their plot card, you get to stagger one of the changers as part of the plot. So I actually found this card to be very reliable and probably a staple for this warband.
Yeah, you mentioned being interested by the design space. I'm a little bit startled that they printed something like this. I know it's not universal, but we've gotten away from cards like Martyred, and was it? Why am I blanking? Not taking risks. Whatever it was. Take a damage, move through a lethal or whatever. But
yeah, it was a while ago.
Yeah. But I mean, Martyred was like you had to be the first one to lose somebody. This you just lose one of your little guys at any time.
Yeah,
including if you did it yourself, which there are circumstances where you might. But I think what gets me is doesn't feel like there's a ton of play around for the other player, other than like, I guess I'll kill this staggered guy so that if they stagger a second one. But you just have to go in and, if you're killing a changer, I'm going to kill a changer, and if they've got it, they've got it, sort of thing. So
yeah, I mean, there certainly isn't much counterplay. That is very true, and maybe that's bad, but I like that it's not it's not the normal things that we see. I think sure. Sprinkling those in every once in a while and not having them be universal is fine. Once they become universal, it becomes maybe too easy for everyone to use them. And I mean, you really don't want to lose your changers. That was another thing that I noticed in playing games, is that the changers are very important. If they start dying for you to score this, it's not, I mean, you sort of get repaid for having something go poorly for you, but it's probably hurting you worse than you would like. So I think it's a nice little rubber band mechanic. I think these guys probably need.
Yeah, I'm whether they need it or not. I think it's very very powerful.
We'll see.
And,
we'll see.
Yeah. But it's very good. And I think it's one of the very first things you reach for when you're building a deck, because I think it fits into basically anything that you're trying to do.
Oh, of course, absolutely. Were there any others that you wanted to highlight?
No, and I think we won't hold ourselves to this ironclad, but I think we'll try and keep it to one of each, because we have so much to go through.
There's 3 more decks after this one.
I will say on first read through of their deck, I did not quite recognize how powerful the Rivals deck was until it was on the board, and then going through it a second time, I was like, oh well. Okay.
Yeah,
it is quite good. And I think some of that was like, there were article highlights like 9 Fates, which is fine, but not crazy and all that sort of thing. But they've got some solid surges. They got some real doable stuff that doesn't need you to like twist yourself into a pretzel to make it happen.
No. And their 2 glory cards are mostly pretty doable. So the deck kind of works just well out of the box, which is nice to see, but also it's like, oh, I didn't recognize this on paper. They sound more complicated than they ended up being. I agree. All right, so that takes us to gambits, unless you'd rather do upgrades first, but I really like their gambits, so I'm excited to get to them.
Tell me what you really like about them then.
So overall, I mean, they have a lot of these weird sort of tricky cards doing a whole bunch of different things. But the one in particular that I absolutely love, although maybe we'll see that it's a problem card, we'll see how it plays out in Champs, is Will of the Architect. And this is a strict upgrade to, what was it called? The universal card from Nethermaze. We could swap 2 feature tokens, but basically this is pick 2 feature tokens, place each feature token in the hex the other was in. It doesn't care if anyone was standing on them, doesn't care what type of feature token they are. Like, you can use this to disrupt your opponent's plays. You can use this to set up your plays. There's just...
You use this to win the tiebreaker.
Absolutely. Like, there's just so many things you can do with this. I remember I got to use this to be able to score 9 fates.
Yeah.
Because so I guess I'll just quickly, for people who don't remember, 9 fates, you have to be holding objectives that exactly add up to 9. And so I was like, man, I don't have a way to like move this around. And then I was like, oh no, I do. I have objective 4 and I can just choose to have objective 5 because I want it. And I just did it as like the last thing I did in the power step. And I was like, well, unless you're out of distraction, I will get this, and it's 2 glories. So felt real good. We'll see how bad it ends up being for the game, because there's a lot of people who care about being on some feature tokens and specific types of feature tokens. So if you can just be like, oh, that cover hex you're in, I'm just going to make that an objective now. That's pretty punishing. Maybe it'll be fine. It feels very strong to me, though.
My instinct is that it is situationally extremely strong, and then sometimes it just won't matter at all, and then you've got to. I mean, it won't matter to the opponent. So my instinct is that it's probably fine. I like to think about the builds that you could do with these guys that might really leverage that. Again, I already mentioned stockpile, which is have objectives that add up to 6. That's the way to score that a little more easily. And this can help you into that. You can lean into some of those objectives and then manage to do that kind of castle play style we were talking about. So I think this is one that helps them unlock that castle play style. Yeah,
very good. I like it a lot. How about you? Pick just one of these fun gambits.
This was super hard. There are some lights out gambit spells here, which I think will get a ton of time that they get talked about. There's some that I love for the art, like really just kind of leaning into this. If I have to just pick the one, I'm actually going to go with I'm going to stay on brand for our podcast, and I'm going to leave those amazing gambit spells to the side. I'll bolt of Tzeentch, Field of Change, Summon Abomination are all amazing, and you should look at them. But Latching Tendrils is choose one enemy fighter, push the chosen fighter up to 2 hexes so that they are adjacent to one or more friendly changers. That is kind of an in-faction distraction. It has some setup requirements, situational. You can't just reach all the way across the board and do it, but real disruptive, can set up some cool plays, can put a fighter in a real risky spot. Lots of applications. Anytime somebody's got a push enemy in-faction gambit, like that's pretty rad.
Yeah, so, you got to watch out because that's a big push.
Yeah. It can take a carefully positioned fighter and put them in an extremely vulnerable position.
Yeah. You want to keep your fighters out of the kill zone with these guys, and this card is going to put them right in the middle of that. And it's just like, ooh, there are 4 fighters who can now shoot my fighter that just got pushed into the danger zone.
Yeah. So
real bad.
Yeah. But like you said, a lot of fun gambits in here, a lot of fun tech, some that are just like raw power, and some that that'll be really cool when you pull off a little swapperoo or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So, man, so excited about so many of those. I hope we get to discuss them with people after they can read the article about all of them, because they are fun. Upgrades, though. Also some fun upgrades, but not in the same way. I'm less excited about their upgrades than their gambits. Sure. But how about you lead us off this time? What is one that you found to be particularly fun?
Well, I kind of wanted to pick something else, but I'm going to go with Ether Tether, mostly because this is an illusion upgrade.
Yeah.
And if any warband should have illusion upgrades, it does feel like it ought to be a Tzeentch warband. So I was just kind of glad to see that and know that that mechanic is not abandoned,
Yeah.
That now that we are out of Ulgu, that we'll continue to see these periodically. And that's cool because I like it. I think it was, we've talked about it before. I think it was a mechanic we were kind of skeptical of when we first saw it. And I think it's worked out pretty neat for the game.
Yeah.
So this is an illusion like any other where it'll go on for free. It will break at the end of the action phase or if that fighter is dealt damage or chosen. But it's -1 dice from enemy fighters' attack actions to a minimum of 1 while they target this fighter. It has to go on a changer. That's powerful.
Very.
Taking a dice out of somebody's attack pool is a big deal. I use a similar one in Ducunnan Crew and have loved it. So it can really swing some odds if somebody's trying to fish for a crit to get through on Kindlefinger, who's 2 dodge, maybe on guard because of your changer process or whatever. Real nifty, and it's usable right out of the bat, right out of the gate, I should say. So I liked it for its thematic and its thematics, and it's for its use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not having any sort of range restriction makes this just so brutal. Just any attack is -1 dice. It just very, very good.
But I like that it's restricted to changers, because if you could throw this on Ephilim, then it'd be
goodness,
probably a little too much.
Yeah. Worth noting here, all of the changers at some point end up with 2 defense dice. So if they have that and this, you're probably just going to want to leave them alone until this goes away. They're probably not hitting them. I've had a hard time choosing which one I like better, but there are 2 in particular that I found to be very fun, and one of them is also a changer one, so I'll go with that one. And it is called Boundless Change. So this is a changer restricted upgrade that when this fighter makes an attack action, each friendly fighter within 3 hexes of the target supports the attack action. It's a really big bubble. Once I put this out, it was basically, this fighter just has double supports on every attack for the rest of the game. It was super good. I think both times that I got to use it, I was putting it onto the Spawn Maw, which is the bitey guy who can spike up to 3 damage if he has a large target. He's rolling 3 dice innately, just no matter what. So 3 dice with double supports meant it was almost guaranteed going through every single time. And it ended up doing a ton of work. And it just felt like you could almost guarantee that this was going to allow you to get some hits through. The one sort of maybe balancing factor to this is that a lot of the changers non-spell attacks are not great, and some of them don't have an attack that isn't a spell attack. So supports are only useful. Well, actually, just looking at it now, there's only the 2 fighters who can benefit from this, but it was very good with both of them. So I did find that to be very powerful, but now I'm realizing that maybe outside of Rivals, it won't actually be as good.
That's fair. I mean, I think it's a cool balancing thing. I think we didn't mention that one of the things about changers is they cannot use weapons.
No weapon upgrades.
Yeah, so that is not a particular way to sneak around this one.
Yeah,
so.
Correct. Yeah, I guess if we ever get any more cards that change the dice characteristic of your attacks, you could go to regular attack dice, and then, but we're getting into crazy land, so we just won't go there. But needless to say, there are a lot of other really cool cards for this warband, and you should definitely go check them all out on the blog. But we should keep it moving, because we've got 3 more decks to get through, including a new warband. So on to Stormcoven. So this is our new Curse Breakers 2.0, I guess you could say.
Sure.
Yeah, so another 3-fighter warband for Stormcast. They're keeping that trend going. And I guess the big thing to call out is that they have a very interesting Inspire mechanic where it's a reaction after another fighter's activation. You can just choose to inspire one of the fighters who didn't activate. So, while that's powerful to have the choice of being inspired kind of at will, it makes, at least in my experience, I remember feeling like I was under pressure to plan out my whole turn to know who I wanted inspired when.
Yep.
And that was much more difficult in practice than I thought it was going to be in paper.
Yeah, I think we looked at this warband and we said, well, this is the kind of easy mode warband, because you just pick whichever one is going to have the right tools for the job, inspire that one, and then you're good to go, and you're just going to do it. And you're like, well, actually, it's the timing of it is challenging, because two of the fighters. So we should also say Domitan's the one who's got his name on the warband, but he's not always the leader. It's whoever's inspired. Whoever happens to be inspired is the leader. And then whoever is inspired is the one that, so they're all level 1s unless they're inspired, then they're level 2. So they gain leadership and level 2, and that's where they get their defensive buffs. So Stratosi and Sarpon, they go up to 2 defense dice. Domitan annoyingly does not get an extra defense dice, gets an extra point of health, which makes him a large fighter and kind of may break upgrades or make him ineligible for certain things, and also gives up more glory. But because of that timing, like you could say, okay, so I've got, I don't know, like Stratosi inspired. I want my next activation to be with somebody else who's inspired, so I'm going to toss the inspiration over to Sarpon. And like, oh, well, because now Stratosi has uninspired to hand it off to Sarpon, she is in presumably a more vulnerable position, having charged forward, and she just handed off her inspiration, and so now she's back down to 1 defense dice. That is a problem. So.
It ended up being a bigger problem than maybe we first realized until we saw it happening, and then we're like, oh, these guys just get blown up. It's not great.
Yeah, it can do, especially because their rivals decks, it seemed like they were sporting some fairly aggressive rivals decks or things that wanted them to push forward, which was what the Pandaemonium was happy to have happen. And so I think, because here's the thing, like they are very similar up and down the line. They all have a range 2 attack. It does, most of them do 2 damage. I think Domitan goes up to 3 damage with a range 2 attack, which is great. They all start with a range 3 spell attack that starts out at 1 damage and can do more if it's inspired, or pick up different rules. And it's a thing where, like, if you can find, I don't know if the correct term is a mid-range deck or something that doesn't force you to dive forward with them, I think they have a lot of potential if you can avoid having to lob them into vulnerable positions. I think that's where the decisions get hard. So
it felt, after playing the few games that we played, it felt like it was just a very bad matchup where the one side really wanted their opponent to come to them and play as a castle and just like stay in their own territory and shoot people who come in, and the other side was like, go all in on your opponent's territory. And it's like, well, that's not great. Like, it's gonna always be an uphill battle for the Stormcoven in the battle in just the box matchup. So it feels weird, but I think in practice, when you're not just playing that matchup over and over again, I think maybe they'll feel a little more flexible and be able to do a few different things.
I think that's true. I think the other thing we should mention is that they all have something extra when they inspire other than that. So like, when Domitan becomes inspired, gets to stagger every enemy fighter within 2 hexes. That's a once per round thing. But
yeah, that's very powerful though.
Yep. Sarpon, same thing. Once per round, he can do a push one friendly once he becomes inspired. So having a free push when you need it. I think that, like you were saying, I think you were talking about having to like try and plan out your whole round right from the start. Who am I going to activate when? Those pieces of it make it even more challenging.
Yeah.
Like, okay, wait, hold on. This is the guy I want inspired, but also I'm going to want a free push. So actually, maybe I want Sarpon. So actually, maybe and like, whoa, boy, just a lot to work through with them.
Absolutely.
And so I think we thought like, hey, look, there's these 3 big, long-ranged, tanky-ish fighters. At least on paper, I think they seem pretty easy to use. They in experience seem like the much harder warband to use effectively.
Yeah. As soon as you lost one fighter, it felt like this warband suddenly got very difficult to use, in my feeling. And so I think building out of rivals, you'll probably try, like you said, to find ways to mitigate losing fighters so that you can, benefit more from using the ones inspired when you want to, and not having to like throw them forward recklessly and then have them sitting around at one block and just getting lit up. But that's I think, pretty good overview of the warband. There's a lot going on in a relatively misleadingly simple shell. But let's get through some cards. We've got.
Sure.
I think we'll just do it the same way. And I think, as we've talked in the past, this is a good way to build your deck. So it makes sense to highlight cards in the same way. Do objectives, and then power cards come after that. So what is one of their objectives that you like?
So there's a lot that look like they should just score like butter, right? Like there's, and then again, once the reality of getting on the board happens, you're like, oh, that isn't quite as easy as I thought, or this actually gets a lot harder in the later round, or it's forcing me into particular inspiration directions, like how I'm handing back and forth the inspiration, all that sort of thing. And so it's scoring these is another layer in that push pull that they got. So some of these can really kind of hurt your brain, make things more complicated. But I picked out Heavenly Alignment, particularly because it doesn't do this as much. Like it's a thing that'll just maybe happen. And it's one that you can score without risking anybody too much. This is a surge for 1. You have a casting roll for a friendly fighter's spell, attack, action that contain 2 or more magic dice, and each of the magic dice in the casting roll showed a different symbol. Not too unreasonable. It doesn't need to be successful. So It could be a total fail. It could be where you got 1 success, but then your opponent managed to block it. So if you're going to be tossing, I think they'll have a build, maybe in Champs, maybe in Nemesis, where this can sit in there and you can kind of toss spells at a little bit of a safer distance and pop this one off. Yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
So because unlike some of the other ones, doesn't risk anything, I think that one stood out a little bit for me.
Yeah. So this is hard because, like you say, on paper, some of these looked great, and then playing with them, I was like, oh, actually, this is very difficult. So there was a few of the end phases that I thought about highlighting, but I think actually the one that stood out to me is probably going to be an important card, but not as simple as I thought at first, is Channel the Storm. This is another surge for 1, and you score this immediately after the second or subsequent friendly fighter has been inspired in the same round. When I first read this, I was like, wow, this is just absolutely dead simple. You're going to score this immediately, and then you're just going to get the glory train rolling, and it's going to be crazy. You don't actually just always want to swap the inspire.
Right.
And it's a little difficult because, as we mentioned, Domitan and Sarpon have these other reactions that you can use after you inspire them. And maybe you don't want to just have them be sitting back and inspiring just to score this early on if you're wanting to take advantage of those other or those reactions. So it's like this thing that feels like it should be the thing that gets you going is actually something you have to be very careful about when you score it and how you score it. And I kind of like that because in some ways, when a surge is almost too easy, it's like, well, of course, I'll just get this always.
Yeah.
I think this one will always score, but you have to be, thinking about when you want to do it and how you want to do it. And
I mean, obviously, if you're down to one fighter, it's dead.
Yeah, I mean, then it's dead, but hopefully you drew this early enough that...
Yeah, but I think into that, and again, I apologize if I'm misusing this term, but in that mid-range style, this gives you a thing that if you're kind of building up a little glory before you dive in, this and the one I mentioned where you kind of moving some more conservative, safe plays, lobbing shots from afar, inspiring some guys. Okay, now I've got some glory. Now I'm ready to go in. Maybe I've got a little extra protection, or I've got a little extra insurance that this is going to be a effective thing. So
yeah, absolutely. I would kind of agree. I think these guys could end up being a warband where it's like hanging out in the middle of the boards doesn't feel bad. They can reach out with their sticks or their spells and get people. They can kind of just hang out there and feel pretty happy. But I think the Rivals deck pushes you very much towards be an enemy territory. And it's like, that's so hard to balance. And there's just so much right now, actually, that sort of does the same thing where it's like be an enemy territory. And it is always difficult, I think, to find that balance, especially with just a 3-fighter warband.
Yep.
But they've got some pretty good gambits to kind of help in some of these things. Some of them are quite a lot harder to play than we initially thought. But one that I found to be better in play than I thought it would be on paper, which is why I want to highlight it, is Howling Gales, which is also very on brand for our podcast.
Yeah.
So this is a gambit spell. You cast it on channels, so it's a little harder. Focus, yes. Man, I always get swirlies. I always get these mixed up. Trying to be better about learning the name. If it's cast. And it's on the single, so it's not impossible to do, but it's also not as easy as it could be. So if this is cast, you choose 2 enemy fighters in the same territory. So most likely they're going to be in enemy territory, but maybe not. And then you push each of those chosen fighters up to 1 hex closer to the other chosen fighter. If the chosen fighters end up adjacent, you stagger them. So when I first read this, my thought was, so you find 2 fighters who are close together, you like push them slightly out of position and stagger them. That's pretty cool. And then we were playing with it, and I had two demons when I was playing Pandaemonium, and they were like on opposite sides of the board, both standing on objectives. And then the spell goes off, pushes them both off of objectives towards each other, because like anything closer to the middle of the board is closer to each other. Yeah. And then also was pushing one of them into a lethal hex and the other one into a snare hex. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Oh boy.
And it was just like, rough. And that is always going to stand out to me as being like, I didn't even consider that you could do those things. So yeah, I think this one's good. I think this is an example of like, it's worth the lower chance of happening because it is very good.
I mean, lower chance of happening, and has a little bit of the requirement of like, if they only had 1 fighter, then it's not doing anything, right. Or if their fighters are in different territories. So there's some limitations, but as long as you clear those limitations, it's a infinite range, double distraction sort of thing. So
right, with the potential for a double stagger if you happen to have it set up just right.
Yeah.
How about you? Which one jumps out at you?
Well, that was my first choice, but I also put down Thundershock, and this is another gambit spell. And what I liked about this one was the flexibility of it. So it is 1 focus, and the It says, if cast, choose an enemy fighter adjacent to the caster. Deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter and -1 damage from the chosen fighter's attack actions to a minimum of 1. This effect persists until the chosen fighter is taken out of action or the end of the round. So it's got that ping, very limited range, but it gives you that chance to finish somebody off that you have gotten the one hit. And we always see how pings can be pretty potentially useful. And this warband also has access to, you may be able to cast this with a level 2 with a reroll or something like that, where its probability goes way up. So get through some tough defenses and then finish them off with this. But also I like the flexibility of saying, like, okay, they've kind of powered up one particular fighter. Let's make it so that fighter is no longer, all that effective. So bringing a damage 3 down to 2, or bringing somebody out of lethal range, or even worse for them, if you maybe drop them from a damage 2 to a damage 1, and all of a sudden they got to hit one of your guys like 4 times to be able to score the kill. Like, well, okay, that's not happening. So I like that it's got those options. I don't know, this may end up being like an 11th gambit in championship style deck building, but I highlight it because I like that style of card that has, hey, this is useful in a couple different scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's plenty of warbands right now that don't have innate 3 damage, and this could feel very bad for those warbands.
Yeah.
So definitely agree. Very fun card. I like the design space. It's not just deal damage. You get to actually have some utility with your ping.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, since I stole your gambit, how about you lead us off on upgrades so that you got your choice no matter what?
Well, there's one that provides a reroll to casting spells, which I guess I'm sort of cheating by mentioning that it exists. But I think that's just very utilitarian, very helpful. But I wanted to particularly highlight Blades of Azir. This is fighters range 2 attack actions are range 3 and have stagger. So Domitan, if he's inspired, has a range 2 damage 3 attack. That means he's going up to range 3 damage 3 with stagger on it. So you get one, and then you're just going to be able to keep pouring things on. When I first saw this, I was like, this is insane and busted, and what the hell? Like, this is crazy good. But on thinking of it, what's interesting about it is that it kind of, like, if you have great strength on that fighter, then all of a sudden you basically null the great strength, right? So you're like, yeah, this great strength doesn't work anymore because this fighter doesn't have a range 1 or 2 action anymore. It has a range 3 action, attack action, I should say. Well, they may have a range 1 if you've put a weapon on them, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think it's an example of a card, almost like the one that you brought up for Pandaemonium, where, like, wow, in certain circumstances this would be totally busted, but you think about it a little bit more, like, actually this may be a fairly well balanced card as it goes. But I think in this scenario, which we saw happen a number of times, where they ended up down to a single fighter, getting this on that last fighter really opens up your options. If Absolutely. You are wanting to lay out more damage, or it can be the case where you're worried about killing yourself if your spell goes wrong or something like that. Only Stratosi, I think, has a inspired, just guaranteed 2 damage spell.
Yep.
I think Domitan's spell is still 1 damage with it, but it has Cleave and Grievous 1, and Sarpon also has Grievous 1 and Snare. So this gives kind of a safer and a really nice way to get a lot of work out of a single fighter.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a very flexible card. I don't think it's broken in any way, but there'll certainly be games where all of a sudden this comes out and your opponent will be like, oh no, I'm very out of position now.
Yeah.
Which I think that's cool. The stagger feels, maybe it's like, okay, cool, fine. I don't know that it'll actually matter a whole lot, but in the games where it does matter, it'll be quite impactful.
Yep.
For me, there's 2 I like a lot, and I don't know which one to highlight here. I guess I was going to go with a different one, but I'm going to change my mind here at the last second. I'm going to talk about Master of Ancient Lore.
Ooh, okay.
So
you're making this pick at Josh.
I'm making this pick at Josh. So Josh, when you see this, know that yes, I'm talking about this card, and that I like it in spite of your feelings about card draw. So this is an upgrade that gives you a reaction where you can use this after an opponent plays a power card. You then get to draw a power card. If it stopped there, this would still be very good. Just getting to draw extra cards, and pretty much guaranteed because it's any power card. So if you can play this in round 1 or 2, you're getting at least 1 card to replace this. Ideally, you'd want to be able to get 2. But it goes on. So if they played a Gambit spell, though, you get to draw 2 power cards, which is crazy. I guess the important caveat here that I should have mentioned with the first clause is that this can only be done once per round. So if you do draw this late, it's probably not doing that much for you. But I think if you build around this in your deck, where you know you want to be able to draw more power cards because you care about casting Gambit spells and you want to have a hand that's always got options, this should keep the cards flowing, and that's probably better than a lot of other upgrades you could have.
Sure. Yeah, even if the only thing it does is it thins your deck. If the only thing it does, like say you've dropped it in round 3 and all it does is replace itself, as in like you needed a slot to put this down and then they play a power card and you draw one. You have kind of effectively thinned yourself to 10 Gambits, 9 upgrades, which I know I've already mentioned that late in the game that's less important, but in this case, maybe more so if you have a build that cares a lot about casting a certain number of spells or getting Gambit spells to go off or what have you. Yeah.
And I think for anybody who hasn't played in some of the older seasons where we had a lot of draw tech is very strong. Sometimes all you need is that one answer and you can mess up your opponent's game plan and it can shift the game significantly.
There's a long history of draw tech cards that came out and you're like, well, that's not very good. Like what, Unnatural Truce or whatever. You're like,
yeah.
And then people take it nonstop. And you're like, oh, well, okay. I guess it is.
Whoops. Yeah. So I'm at this point, I think we've seen enough that I'm never going to sleep on a draw tech card again, especially one that is this easy to trigger. Hey, if your opponent doesn't want you to draw cards, they can't play cards. And that would be almost better than you getting to, like, if you get to turn off your opponent's playing cards because they're worried about you drawing into something that's disruptive, that's almost as disruptive as drawing into the disruptive card. So I think this card will be used a lot and probably very effectively. And in those games where you're playing against people who have Gambit spells, man, this is going to feel rough because even if they'd fail to cast it, you still get to draw 2 cards.
Right. Yeah.
So strong, so good. Like it a lot. But that is the Stormcoven. They're a very complex warband. We certainly had trouble with them, and that was very counter to what we thought when we first read through and reviewed the cards. So kind of a fun example of like, hey, don't necessarily judge cards until you've played with them.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to have their first impression, their hot take, but think a little bit past that, or be prepared to be surprised.
Yeah,
or maybe we're just idiots.
Well, yeah, maybe we just are bad at evaluating cards. That's also a possibility.
But I mean, it almost goes without saying, but just to explicitly lay it out there, this is a 3-caster warband. In the history of the game, there's only ever been one other 3-caster warband, and there's only been one other beyond that multiple caster warband with Crimson Court had 2 level 1s in it. That's an incredibly rare thing, and even with the new salvage mechanic, that really opens up, because salvage helps you with power cards, doesn't do anything for objectives. And so there are options that this warband has that almost no other warband has access to as a result. So
Yeah,
that can't be overlooked, especially in something like championship play.
absolutely. I was just going to say, I think for championship, for the people who want to invest with these guys, get the reps in, get good with them, I think they'll be very rewarding. But
Yeah.
they do feel tough. I think it'll take a while to find that groove and figure out like how best to use these guys.
It'll be fun to watch somebody make these guys sing.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to maybe next year at AdeptCon. But we've still got 2 more decks to go. Let's get through these. So we'll say, I think right off the bat, we can just say both of these Rivals decks do not have plot cards.
Oh yeah.
So
very much worth mentioning.
Important note. And just to get it out of the way right away, these are very usable for building with other things in Championship. You can cherry pick just the 1 or 2 cards you want. There's no restrictions. So a nice change from how many plot locked decks we had in the Gnarlwood. So I'm certainly excited to see what that means for championship builds going forward. But for today, we're just reviewing them as Rivals decks and maybe a few takes for other deck building. But
sure.
Which one would you like to start with? We've got Seismic Shock or Toxic Terrors.
Let's go with Seismic Shock.
Okay. So this is our, you may not be able to guess from the name, but this is the spellcasting deck. So
right.
What objective from this wild and crazy deck speaks to you?
So let's see. We played a couple, just as a caveat, managed 3 games with, we did Seismic Shock and a Toxic Terrors.
Yes, we did.
So Seismic Shock, this is a deck, before we get too far into it, about 75% of this deck bricks if you don't have a caster alive.
Yes.
And the other stuff it likes doing is hold objectives. So I was a complete idiot and thought that I might try to run this with Kagra's Ravagers.
Yeah.
It's like, and also we're doing, this was tested with just a pure Rivals deck, which I'll circle back around it in a bit. In back-to-back games, I managed to miss twice with Zarshia and beat with Spite Tongue Curse. So doing self-damage once, twice, and then finish her off with a double crit casting roll. So back-to-back games, Zarshia killed herself without ever having the enemy lay a finger on her, which...
Yeah.
That's more of a Zarshia problem than a Seismic Shock problem.
Absolutely.
But it did highlight the fact that as soon as she went down, I was like, well, I actually can't play most of these cards or score most of these objectives. So if you're playing this as pure Rivals, you are potentially fairly limited on warbands that I think really can get use out of this. That said, there are some cards that don't brick, and I just wanted to highlight one of those. And this one I think is going to be exciting to a lot of warbands that want to do some holding, and that's Claim the Prize. So dual score this in an end phase if your warband holds each objective in 1 or more territories, including, so it could be no one's territory, and your warband holds 2 or more objectives in 1 or more of those territories. So the short of this is have at least 2 objectives in a single territory and have that represent all of the objectives in that territory. That's super doable, especially in the era of still being able to delve even at a cost. And for a reward of 3 glory in the end phase, that is certainly tempting. I have to imagine, Phil, that you this one would have caught your eye for the Seraphon.
Yeah. It actually
is a duel, man.
It is a duel. It's for 3 glory. And the funny thing is that it's a lot of work to do this. I was actually running a card that they have that's a hybrid that is similar. It's either you hold all the objectives in enemy territory, so more restrictive, a little harder to do, or all of your fighters are in enemy territory. So it had
Mm.
this sort of escape clause to be like, hey, maybe you can't get all of the objectives, but at least you can just like have the 2 remaining skinks that you have in enemy territory and score 2.
Sure.
This is good, but I think I would have to find ways to do it where I'm scoring this in my territory, because I think trying to do
totally.
the hold all
Yeah.
an enemy is very, very hard.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but I think in best of 3, your opponent learns to play around this. But in best of 1, man, this card's going to catch people off, and you're going to score a 3 glory for holding 2 in your territory, and somebody's going to feel real bad.
Yeah. I think it puts a lot of interesting pressure on the feature token placement as well.
Yes.
Because if you end up with 3 in your territory, well, now you're trying to hold 3 or hold 2 and get one of them flipped one way or another. And then if your opponent is seeing that, then they're trying to figure out where they're placing things and how they're manipulating things. So I think that's where you talked about best of 1 versus best of 3. I think best of 3, you see some reactions on feature token placement once you know that this objective is out there.
Absolutely. But still,
What did you go ahead?
Yeah, still a very good card.
Yeah.
So the one that I landed on, there's a lot of sort of weird cards in here that are kind of hard to use, and I think you can build around them for sure. But I just was like, well, what of these are your, like, if I'm going to be doing spell casting, what's a nice staple that I could probably pull out of this? And I thought that Magisterial Might feels pretty good. So this is a surge you score after a power step where 1 or more friendly wizards hold an objective in enemy territory. So that's sort of the worst part about the card. And 1 or more of those wizards is level 2. So it's a little tricky, but it happens quite quickly, and you can probably set it up in such a way that your opponent won't really be able to stop you. It is after a power step, so there is the opportunity for counterplay, but if you're a warband that has access to some way to teleport, or if you have a fairly tanky wizard where you can just place an objective just across the line and just step onto this, it's going to be a pretty easy surge. And I kind of like that, especially in this sort of day and age of having lots of stuff that wants you to be in enemy territory anyway. But this one still is quite doable, especially if you have multiple casters.
Sure. The right, the latter. Needing him to be level 2 really makes this almost like a Domitan card. Is the one who most enjoys this, because they're the ones who are going to have multiple level 2s, and not even at any one time, but it'll be scoreable even if they lose one of their fighters. Yeah. But and this is not the best example, but there are a number of cards in this deck that is leaning so heavily into magic that are not about casting, that are, do you have a wizard? Are they in this position? Or are you holding some objectives and is one of those held by a wizard? Or does this wizard have upgrades and is holding an objective? Like, there's these things that, again, this one, because it mentions needing to be level 2 or greater, a little more restrictive, but there's other ones that you can capitalize on, even if you are something like Kanan, who has a wizard. It's a level 1 wizard up at the top, and a tanky one. So I like that they included those in this instead of all just being about casting spells or spell attacks or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting synergies in the deck, but I think, as we mentioned, there's it's tricky. I think trying to use this as a straight rivals deck was tough. I mean, it didn't help that you were also trying to, maybe use a warband that didn't quite work with the deck.
Sure. Yeah. And that's, but it'll be fun to experiment some more with. And I think it's one that may, let's talk about it now, I guess. We looked at these, and we still have the games and upgrades to talk about this, but we looked at these decks and play them as straight rivals. So just like completely replacing that. I don't know how often we actually see that a universal rivals deck is played as a universal rivals deck. I think that's relatively rare. I suspect, and I don't know this, but I suspect that they're most frequently used to introduce people to Nemesis. Like, okay, supplement your faction cards with this, and that I think makes this much more interesting and functional. But
Absolutely,
I'd be interested to hear from people who are just picking up a universal rival and saying go with it. But
yeah. I think some of at least some of what I was thinking about when we do this is it's like, okay, so you get this new box, you're maybe starting up the game with a friend, or maybe you've played a little bit, but you're trying to get a new person into the game, and you're like, okay, let's just play straight out of this box.
Yeah.
And after you've played the warband decks, you're like, well, let's, change things up. Let's try something different. Just because if you just play the same exact deck over and over and over, you can get a little bored. So it's like, hey, we've got these two other options that we can use. We don't have to do any deck building. Let's try it. And it's sort of like, let's see how it goes. And I think you're right. I think more often than not, people don't do that, but I think there's at least the possibility that people would, and it's interesting to see how it works out.
Yeah, totally. But after that aside, are you ready for gambits here?
Oh yeah. We'll keep cranking here.
Okay.
So gambits, man, there's a number of cool spells here. But I ended up choosing to focus on, this one's called Abyssoth's Screaming Idols, which I'm not quite sure why the idols are screaming, but sure. So this is cast on a channel. So pretty easy. And if it is cast, you pick a feature token within 3 hexes of your caster. You move that feature token 1 hex. After you have done so, if a fighter, and important to note, any fighter, is on that feature token, you deal 1 damage to that fighter.
Yeah.
So this is probably not going to very often be the situation where you're like using this as a pseudo confusion where you get to, end up being on a feature token that an opponent is currently on. But I think it gives you some flexible options where if someone's standing next to a feature token, you could pull this under them and deal them 1 damage. You could use this to pull one out from underneath somebody who you think's about to score from holding objectives. And, in the absolute worst case where you're just needing to cast more spells, there's usually a feature token somewhere within 3 hexes, and you could just move a feature token around as a way to cast a spell.
Yeah.
So I liked the utility that this provides. It's very flexible. It's not super strong, but it's nice. I mean, you can do some good game-changing things with it. It's almost as good as a push. So,
yeah, I think in that same way as I was talking about Thunderstruck, where it has different reasons where it might be useful at a given point. I like that.
Yeah. How about you? What's one of these gambits that you thought was particularly interesting?
I grabbed another gambit spell here. This is localized Quake. So it's another one that is kind of situational, but gambit spell of focus. If it's cast, choose 1 fighter on a feature token or in a hazard hex within 3 hexes of the caster. Push the chosen fighter up to 3 hexes. Here's what I missed the first time through on it. This is choose 1 fighter, not enemy, not friendly. Choose 1 fighter.
Yep.
That's big, right? Yeah. So you can use this to throw an enemy fighter like all the way back out of charge range. If you're, obviously you have relatively limited range as 3 hexes, but 3 hexes then with a push of 3, you can really throw somebody way, way back away. You can use it to, if you got some early positioning, you can use it to really launch one of your fighters forward so they can attack somebody unexpectedly, or so they can end up adjacent to somebody and get multiple attacks. There's a lot that you can do with this if the positioning works out correctly.
Absolutely. This was the other one I was thinking about, because it's like, oh man, what can't you do with a push 3 where the directionality is not limited?
Yeah.
You just have to have it set up first, which I think in this day and age, people tend to end up on feature tokens of some variety. And this is actually where they use the hazard hex. So It doesn't even have to be a feature token. It can be a printed hazard hex as well. So
Yeah.
pretty fun.
Yeah, I like that they use this magic deck to create some interesting gambits. There's some ping in there, like you said, with Abathos Screaming, Idols, and I think maybe Stir the Nest has it, but they're fairly situational pings. Like they didn't go the easy route of just reprinting like Sphere of Akshi or whatever. Like we're gonna make some things that have like some play around with them, have some flexibility, have some unique things that they can do, and I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It felt very much like a control deck after reading through it. So I don't know. I like that. I like that they have some of these control options available. Not some of the strongest ones we've ever seen, but some of the strongest ones we've ever seen were like ridiculous. So I think a nice balance here.
Sure.
And some pretty interesting upgrades too. I mean, they kind of went in some kind of weird, I guess would be a fair way to say, directions with some of these. What's one that really spoke to you?
Let's see. I liked. Well, I'm highlighting this one specifically because it it's almost indicative of the wider deck. So this is Abathos Predatory Animus, and this is a return of a universally available innate. You get an innate channel, but only while this fighter is holding an objective in enemy territory.
Yeah,
that's fairly restrictive, right? Like it's especially if you are a single caster warband. But a lot of this deck has to do with having a caster on a feature token, and getting an innate of any kind is powerful, and so having that opened up to you is kind of a big deal. I don't know that we'll see a ton of this, but there's a lot of cards in this deck that says, hey, do this thing, but only if you're on a feature token, or do this thing, but do it better if you're on a feature token, or something like that. So I thought it was worth highlighting for that reason.
Yeah. And for folks who haven't played with or against innate, it is very like warping as to how it changes the math on some cards. So I think this card could end up seeing some play. Obviously you have to build around it, but I like that one too. That was one I was thinking about. The other one that I had my eye on was Quintox Unseen Hand. So this is a spell action upgrade, which is kind of nice because it gives another spell that you can cast on your fighter. I think this one's actually quite good. So this is on a channel and it says during this action, this fighter has line of sight to each enemy fighter. So fairly important that blocked hexes don't matter for this. And then if cast, you choose an enemy fighter within 6 hexes. So just pretty much pick anybody anywhere. And then you get to pick one. Push the chosen fighter 1 hex. Whoa. Or stagger the chosen fighter. If the casting roll included 1 or more crits, do both. Oh, man.
Yeah. I think the biggest cost of this is just that it's an entire action to use. But like you mentioned, there's some control aspects of this, and if you can get yourself set up where you want to be, you can disrupt enemy scoring while kind of getting yours, and this is doing exactly that.
Yeah. The repeatable ability here is, I think, potentially going to be what makes this card. I agree that like having to spend a whole action on this kind of could be a bad thing. But if you're, a hold warband, you're trying to be castled up in your own territory and you're just like, I'm pretty much set. I don't need to really move a whole lot. I don't really care about getting kills. I just need to be able to stay on these objectives. This is the kind of action that could be really disruptive to your opponent, where you can push them out of charge range, push them off of objectives, push them into lethal hexes. Like, there's just a lot you can do, and this range is so huge that it's effectively just distraction on an activation, which that's pretty good. And then for those warbands where you just need to cast spells, having a repeatable spell that you can get off regardless of having a fighter that you can attack is pretty good. I think Curse Breakers would probably like this a lot, because they have a bunch of stuff that just cares about casting spells. So
Sure.
should be interesting. But man, I love the idea of just getting to use distractions just from all over the place and do it multiple times. But that's Seismic Shock. Anything else that you want to highlight before we move on?
No, I think I'm good to move to the next.
All right.
And final.
Yeah, final one. Toxic Terrors. So this is an interesting deck. I guess before we get into specific cards for this deck, it's worth noting they leaned really heavily into the theme for this deck. So if you couldn't tell from the name, this is a poison deck, which is cool. It's actually something I'd kind of hoped they would do at some point after they introduced poisons back in Beastgrave, I think is when we saw the first one.
I believe that's correct.
And so they were like, yeah, well, what happens if you make an entire deck that's built around poison?
Yeah.
And so pretty much everything in the deck is in some way tied to poisons, or with new, because we didn't have this previously, poison upgrades. So you're just looking for that poison keyword, but lots of interesting stuff. I like the flavor here. We'll see. Actually, from the games that we did play, it felt like it played relatively well for a Rivals deck. So that was a nice bonus.
If we look at, so we talk about standing on its own or not, but the warbands that have poison in them, I think there's maybe 5, I want to say.
Yeah, it's a small number, that's for sure.
Yeah, and all but one of them only have a single one. So I think that's Starblood Stalkers, Skittershank's Claw Pack, the original Canite, the Blade Coven.
Yep.
I think Gnarl Spirit Pack, and then the Soul Raid have 2. So
probably the two best ones.
Yeah, 2 very good ones. I wonder. I mean, I don't think this is. I don't think this is necessary whatsoever, but there are some upgrades you might look back in retrospect and be like, well, that could be a poison upgrade. So like, I think right. I'm remembering specifically, oh no, maybe it's Venomous Spittle, I think, is not a poison upgrade. It's not a poison, but that's I kept thinking that the Snarlfangs had some poison in there. They have some stuff that sounds like it would be, but
probably could have been if it had come after this deck.
But anyway, poison gambits, poison upgrades, a lot of stuff that interacts with it. Kind of cool to see. Not, like you said, not expected, but we'll take it. I think there's a little bit also some focus on, there's some things that like benefit from a leader doing particular things in here. So I think if you have a leader, if a lot of your warband runs through your leader, then you may also be looking in at this deck for those reasons. And I will say my overall take on this on first pass was that there are some situationally very strong cards, and the question is, will you be able to engineer that situation, or will it occur on its own often enough for it to be good? Right.
Agreed.
I think that was my kind of takeaway, but some because of it being against Kagra's Ravagers, and some not. We saw it with Kanan, which actually was pretty good with the positioning. They could kind of set up a number of these things and have a big bad leader at the top of the food chain there that can trigger some of the leader stuff too. So one seemed pretty functional on its own.
Yeah, and one of the things that had sort of been rattling in my brain when we were first looking through the cards is it's like, well, a lot of these poisons, you're going to want enough fighters around to be able to sort of take advantage of this. And so you probably are going to want a larger warband because like, there's persisting stuff that affects the specific poisoned fighter. And so like if you only have one fighter left who can take advantage of the persistent poison, you're not getting the full benefit. But if you've got like, 3 fighters who can all make an attack on that poisoned fighter now, and they can all get the benefit, that's pretty good. So some interesting stuff. Like you said, lots of very situationally powerful abilities, and it felt, again, kind of like a control-esque thing going on with all these poisons. So very interested to see what people do with this with more deck building.
Yeah, between these 2 universal decks, there's definitely some more control options being kind of tossed into the card pool, which is fun to see.
Yeah, very fun. So yeah, what were some of the favorite objectives that you had?
Well, I'm going to stick to the one,
fair.
But the very first one in the deck, the number 1 of 32, Capable Poisoners. This is a duel. It's a 2 glory end phase, which is always making it more interesting. Your warband made 1 or more successful attack actions in the preceding phase. That's a pretty low bar to clear. And so then you got to look at the other side of the duel. Like, well, then how hard is the other side? And 2 or more surviving friendly fighters each have 1 or more poison upgrades. So you have to spread a couple poison upgrades around and then have enough to do that. So I think I was trying to figure out that this warband has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 poison upgrades. So almost all your upgrades in here are poison upgrades. Actually 9 because of the attack action. So essentially all but 1 are poison upgrades in one way or another. So if you are running this pure rivals, which again we said is probably not happening all that often, then that is super scoreable, especially from round 2 or later once you've already got a little bit of seed glory out there. So it's one of those duels. It's a rare duel where like one half of it is just so easy. And I think it had to be in there just to be like, hey, look, it's not cool if you just put out some upgrades and then stand in the back corner. Like, you do have to engage. Like, all right, fair enough. So
we'll do a little bit
that
of
one kind of jumped at me. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we'll see. Well, you can see in some of these other cards when you go and read all of them. There's a number of things that check and care about the poison upgrades. Like having a certain number of them, fighter who has them doing certain things. And so it sort of ends up being this leverage point of like, at what is the correct number of poison upgrades where these cards become playable? How many do you need to have in the deck? Like,
right.
My thinking was that you probably need at least 5. And so then the question is, are there 5 that you would want to have in your deck over other potential upgrades?
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to play with. I think it needs testing. I think even in just the test games we had, it's just pure rivals. So it's hard to know because it's designed to have the numbers. Like we mentioned, there's 9 upgrades. It'll just work. If you start building like Nemesis or Champs builds for this, though, are you going to have enough? And how do you balance that? And is it going to be good enough where you're just taking poison upgrades? So a little bit of a tangent, but I think an important thing to highlight. I do like the idea, though. I'm certainly interested in trying it. But the card that I wanted to highlight is Lurk in Wait, which kind of it's not super strong, but it's a different kind of card, and I kind of wanted to highlight it for that reason. So this is another duel. It's an end phase, scores for 1, and the conditions are 1 or more friendly fighters are in enemy territory, and 1 or more of those friendly fighters has no move or charge tokens. So there's a couple different ways you could engineer this in round 1. They're all relatively difficult, but you don't see a lot of stuff that's just like be standing around someplace, like one fighter just happens to be hanging out and then you score. And I kind of like having some of that back. And like, yes, it's universal. So it has that potential, kind of how we were talking earlier, where it could become abusable, especially for certain warbands. Looking at you, Mollog and or Fish.
Yeah, that's funny. I totally forgot about Stalag Squig. Stalag Squig just like, yeah, I'm here. What's up?
Yeah, which honestly, I mean, it's kind of cool that you could just do this and just most people ignore Slag Squig. And you're like, yep, there he is, lurking in wait.
Well, and it's funny because I also thought of Soul Raid, but I totally forgot about the fish. I was like, hey, you could like shove the crab and get the, like a couple crab pushes and you'd be there. I'm like, or just put the fish down. Yeah.
So, I mean, I really like that kind of stuff. The warbands that can revive an enemy territory can also pick this up very easily.
Great point.
Like on its face, you're kind of maybe looking at this like, how am I going to do that? So round one is going to be awful. Like this card's probably not worth it. But I like that it's very flexible for certain warbands. It's not something everyone's going to take, but the warbands that can score it easily are probably just going to auto take this. So
yeah, Heradeep had a couple of warbands that had some like companion pushes and stuff like that.
So I do like the design space. I think this is a fun card, even though it's not super powerful.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Also one that doesn't care about poisons. So I chose to highlight something that's against the theme, but it stood out. Going back to actually caring about poisons though, there's a number of cool poison gambits. It's hard to pick just one that I want to highlight, though the one that I really like the card art for this one, and I like what it does. This is Ill Prepared. So this is a poison where you just choose an enemy fighter on a starting hex. So the range is unlimited, but you do have to pick somebody who has been on a starting hex, which maybe is going to be difficult later in the game. But you get to give that fighter a move token.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you're not charging. Maybe not even moving because all you can do is move with that fighter now.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it is that if the chosen fighter is still on a starting hex, they can't make attack actions.
Yeah. I the other warband, once I barely avoided throwing Kagra's Ravagers directly into the trash can, I gathered myself and I busted out Eyes of the Nine, and then had this dropped on Vortimus in the first round. I was like, oh no.
Rough.
Yeah. Now I can't charge. It basically burned an entire activation. Now later in the game, this may just not apply. This is kind of a prime example of what I'm talking about, like situationally very powerful cards. Like, in the first round, this is pick a fighter. That fighter is not going to charge, and may even burn the other player an entire activation to like at least get them to somewhere usable. But then later you might just not have anybody on a starting hex, and then now what? So,
and it is worth mentioning there's a final caveat on this, that it persists until the end of the round or until damage is dealt to the chosen fighter. So I guess if your opponent really wanted this gone, they could get rid of it. They could like run through a lethal or something, but it's not a great option. I just feel like there's going to be times where you've got pushes in your warband where you could engineer this. And if it's towards the end of a game where it's like, I will push you onto a starting hex, I will poison you, you now have a move token and can't make attacks until you move off that token.
Yeah.
And your opponent's just like, okay, checkmate. I don't have anything. Like, it's an elite warband or something and they're down to one or two fighters and you just shut one of them completely off. Like, wow. Maybe not quite as bad as, what was it called? Beastgrave card where it was like something stare or whatever. You just get to put move token on somebody.
Somebody within 2 would put a move on somebody else, and not vindictive stare, but something like that.
But anyway, I mean, I remember so many games where I was like, okay, we're getting close to the end.
Terrifying gaze.
Could be.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Somebody can go look it up. It's out there. You can find it. But
it's going to burn in my brain until I find it. So.
Oh yeah, there so many games where I'd get to like round 3, somebody would play that at the start of round 3, and I'd be down to 1 or 2 fighters, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I am out of activations. I just can't do anything because they just chose to run away from my fighter after locking them down.
Yeah.
And I lose the game because I just can't do anything. And it's like, that kind of feels like the way this deck is going to play, which maybe is good, maybe is bad, but I think it's different. It's certainly not something we're seeing in the game right now. And I really like that. I think that you need to have stuff like that to balance the different play styles in the game. So I'm very excited for this type of card and the other cards in this deck.
Yeah, and you can include this kind of effect in here, and it's not as crippling now that we have the ability to move after you have a move.
Yeah.
But it's still important, blocking somebody else out from a charge and kind of, really limit some of the things they can do. But it's a cool card.
Yeah.
It's a Transfixing Stare.
There it is.
The one. There it is.
I knew it was staring. I can remember the card art. Seared into my brain. What is a poison? I mean, I guess you don't have to pick a poison, but what is a gambit that you enjoy out of this deck?
I wrote down like 5 because I was like, oh man, cool. That's cool, and that's cool, and that's cool. I will. I'll go something that's not a poison, just because I think it may be interesting, even if you're not running poisons. This is Keep the Forest at Bay. Choose 1 enemy fighter in enemy territory and up to 2 friendly fighters. Push each chosen friendly fighter 1 hex closer to the chosen enemy fighter. So it's a situational double push. Obviously, it busts if the enemy doesn't have anyone left in their territory.
Yeah.
But picking friendly fighters and getting to push them, you can double push is rare. So there are definitely warbands where I'm gonna think about this one.
Yeah.
Again, I've got Cunning Crew on the mind, and if you can sneak a couple of fighters unexpectedly into support range, then that warband is very happy.
God, yeah, that's pretty gross. And we've seen plenty of times where a conditional double push is still absolutely game changing, and this is no exception. And this one's actually not that restrictive. Like, towards an enemy fighter in enemy territory can mean just kind of push forward 2 friendly fighters. Like, every hex forward is closer. So very good, very good. I'm sure everyone listening is shocked to hear Davy pick the push card as his choice, but it is a very good push card, and I also thought about it. There's a lot of really cool cards in here, though. Like you said, I'm very, very excited to see people play with this. But we will leave that for another time. We've got some upgrades, and there's plenty of poison ones. I guess if you don't want to pick a poison this time around, you don't have to either. But what's an upgrade that you thought was a cool one or a good one?
I will go with a poison upgrade. It's hard not to here because, like we said, there's like 9 of them here. This one also a push. But Wicked Hunter is a poison upgrade. Reaction: after you play a poison gambit, push this fighter 1 hex, then stagger each enemy fighter adjacent to this fighter. This basically, like, once you have this on, then it upgrades all your poisons to also be a sidestep and stagger effect for this fighter.
So good.
The Creeping Doubt that the Cunning Crew have is, push towards a fighter, and if you end up adjacent, stagger them. That was a moneymaker for me, and this kind of turns any poison into that. Wow. All right.
Yeah.
So good. And a super creepy card art. There's
some very very interesting stuff going on there.
What's this guy's name again? He's the Daintelos Markov. Markov is like, I don't know, like drawing weird pictures with poison blood all over the ground.
Yeah,
really
crazy,
unsettling dude. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
What about you? What upgrade snagged you?
Well, that one did, but I'll find another one. Okay. So there's a couple that I think are pretty good. Let's do. Let me just read this again quick before. So this is okay. I'll highlight this one particularly for Nemesis. I don't think this probably makes it into a lot of champ builds. This is Callus. This is a poison upgrade. This is +1 damage to this fighter's range 1 and 2 attack actions if the target is affected by one or more persisting poisons, or the fighter has 2 or more poison upgrades. And since this one is 1, you just have one other.
Yeah.
Damage is not very available in Nemesis, and having effectively a great strength clone is certainly something that you would want to consider if you're going to be using this deck in Nemesis. So I think this is probably pretty good. There's a lot of poisons where you would just be perfectly happy to throw it out without any sort of additional bonus because it's pretty strong just doing what it does.
Sure.
And then you can use all those poisons as setup for, like, I mean, this example literally shows Kanan being the one getting extra damage, which yikes. But
yeah, you know, on against a wild hunt,
yeah,
you're like, okay,
why? On, man. You already had 3 damage, man. But I mean, even in situations where you're going from 2 to 3, and like your most efficient fighter now is in kill range for all these fighters that you sort of set up with poisons, that's pretty powerful in a Nemesis format. Now, in champs, I think you have plenty of easier choices than this one. But the fact that it sort of stays on theme and gives you the extra damage boost, I think is pretty nice.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, you could combine Callus and Wicked Hunters, and then all of a sudden you're, you know, maybe you have a range 2 fighter who's got +1 damage, and every time you play out a new poison to set somebody up for that damage, you're pushing one closer, and it's like, oh no. All of a sudden you're just doing the old school thing of like, I'm going to bounce around as I keep bopping people with my range 2 attack, and it feels pretty good.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing I've noticed about this deck that is maybe worth mentioning here is there's kind of a lot of combo stuff where, like, one card by itself is okay. You start layering multiple of the cards together, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, there's a lot of benefits you start getting when you have all these things stacked up.
Sure.
Just pretty cool. Not something we've actually seen a lot of in the past. I think a lot of the times where we've seen combo type cards, it's been like, wear all 3 relics, get God mode, and win. Which is fun, but also like it's been a bad design space in the past. So
right.
Something I'm glad that they're still toying with, but not quite to the same extent.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But that, I think, wraps us up for Toxic Terrors, unless there's anything else that you have to mention about it.
No, not really. Just that the Nemesis take is one that our friends over at Battle Mallet do really well.
Yes.
So once they get a chance to drop an episode on this, I'd recommend pointing you in that direction if that's your preferred play format. They'll be coming at it for that mindset. I'm looking forward to hearing their takes on it too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think being so ingrained in that format, they should have some good insights, probably some warband pairings that we didn't even think about. Should be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a lot. Even though we just sort of did a high level take on each of these, there's a lot in the boxes. I will quickly just mention that I think for folks who haven't seen some of the pictures of the new boards that were in the early Warcom articles, they're pretty interesting boards, fairly well balanced in how they're set up. So I'm pretty excited about these new boards. I think they add a lot. There's no like, this is an obviously automatic pick every game kind of a board, but there's a lot of interesting options. So something I'm certainly looking forward to. And I don't know, overall, it felt like a pretty good box. I think the 2 warbands are pretty comparable in power level, although, as we mentioned, one is maybe a little harder to play in that matchup. What were your thoughts? Do you feel like the box is a nice starting point? Is it well balanced?
I think so. I think that we like we said already that we found Pandaemonium to kind of win all the matchups. I'd like to take another run at it here, where the Stormcoven played a little bit more denial, in that they said, okay, like instead of going quite so aggressively for our objectives, we'll try and chip away at the front lines of the Pandaemonium before committing, and see if you can limit the Stormcoven losses a little bit better. That way, maybe deny both warbands some of their glory, and then go in once you've kind of improved your board state. It felt like Pandaemonium had the upper hand, but they were really enjoyable games. I think that was some of the takeaway, and then like to come at it, and ultimately it's just the 3 games. So
yeah, right. I mean,
3 games with that matchup, so gotta see some more.
Yeah. It's not a huge sample size, but it's enough to be certainly informed. I know a lot of the card takes that I had for the reviews are probably gonna feel a little off now, but I think that's actually a good thing almost, where it's like, we can read cards, do evaluations, then go play with them and be like, oh, actually, this plays differently than what I thought.
Yeah, that is worth mentioning one more time, is that unless I have a meltdown in this remaining week that I have to finish getting them uploaded, we do have commentary on every single card in this set. So that's 128 cards more once you include the fighters. Yeah. So if you want the blow by blow on each of these, like the deeper dive, you're welcome to go check that out. I don't know, but I suspect that Path to Glory will probably do their usual and have they'll drop like 4 3-hour episodes to cover all this stuff. Yep, so of course, there's another option for in-depth there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for today. If you've got any thoughts about this episode, anything you'd like us to know, especially if you find anything that we missed in that rule book, you can reach out to us at whatthehexcast.
Don't you dare.
Twitter, whatthehexcast@gmail.com. Or just pop into our Discord. We are around in there all the time. People are always chatting about something. Pretty good space. If you like our show and you've found the AOS bug to be your cup of tea, you can head on over to mortalrealms.com. We've got a group of other podcasts that we're part of, and they do stuff for all the other Age of Sigmar related games. So if you like Warcry or Path to Glory or anything like that.
You were on a story phase that actually at the time of this release will probably not yet be out.
True.
But should be out soon. We're getting to talk about the new Seraphon.
Yeah. So doing a story overview of the new Seraphon, to be determined as to when that will drop. I'm sure within the next few weeks, if it's not out already by the time you're hearing this. Good times. There's a lot there, especially if you're like, if this is your entry point into Age of Sigmar and you want to know more about your warbands, lore, story phase, that's the place to go. They got all of it. We've done all of the different factions at this point, because keep doing all the different books that come out for them. Coming up next from us, as we mentioned early on, we are still working towards getting the Trash Fire Tournament or Sleek's Bowl wrapped up. We just have a lot of games to play. There's 5 of us, and we all want to play each other and figure out who ends up with the best record. So, that's quite a number of games, but we are working on it. It will come soon, and then we also need to get through all this new content. So, next, I think, is a bat rep, although we would actually have to play that game. So we will see.
Our hope is to bring you one of our patented audio bat reps with some stuff from the new things, to be determined exactly what format.
Yep.
Nemesis champions, what warbands, all that sort of thing. But there's a ton to explore with this, and once we get the rest of the crew back in on the content creation. I think they'd love to be able to share some of their thoughts once they get a crack at this stuff and get at it with you.
Yeah,
so
I know everybody with the reveals was very excited about Ephilim's Pandaemonium, so I'm sure we will hear from them about.
We'll be bringing you a Ephilim mirror match for our next one.
Maybe it could be interesting. Anyway, so watch this space. Not 100% sure what it'll be, but probably a bad rep. Davy, do you have a flavor text quiz for today?
You know I do.
It
is. Here's a couple hints for you.
Okay.
It's in the new box. Le gasp.
Oh man,
that narrows it down to 128 cards.
Okay.
It is an objective.
All right.
And we'll start with that. This quote is not attributed to anybody. A terrible way to go.
I believe that is a Mawful End.
Yeah, that's it. We've redubbed an awful end to a Mawful End.
The card art for this one is one of the Stormcasts. Very hard to tell who. Just being swallowed by Spawn Maw in his like whole body that opens up into a mouth, and it's just like legs sticking out, and it's like, oh man, that is real bad. Not good.
Yep.
All right. Recommended listening then to close us out.
Yeah. Because we have to have one pun in here, we're going to go with You're Too Weird.
Oh man, there it is.
It's by the Fruit Bats. It's a fun little ditty. Check it out.
All right. Nice. For What the Hex, I've been Phil.
I've been Davy. Hey, don't you want this? I'm like, that is like a nasty busted up roll of tape. No, I don't. Like,